The deadliest industrial disaster you've never heard of. Bhopal, 1984. On the night of December 2, 1984, the city of Bhopal was quiet. Homes were dark, streets were empty, and most people were already asleep. It was an ordinary night in central India, warm and still, with no signs of danger in the air. There were no alarms, no warnings, no reason for anyone to believe that within a few hours their city would become the site of one of the worst industrial disasters in human history. What happened in Bhopal did not begin with an explosion or a fire. It began silently, invisibly, and by the time people understood what was happening, escape was already impossible. Bhopal was a growing city, surrounded by tightly packed neighborhoods where families lived close to their work. On the outskirts of the city stood a large chemical plant owned by Union Carbide, an American multinational corporation. The factory produced pesticides, part of a global effort to increase agricultural output in developing countries. On paper, it was a modern industrial facility. In reality, by the early 1980s, it had become a neglected and dangerous site. The plant stored large quantities of methyl isocyanate, known as mic, an extremely toxic chemical used in pesticide production. Mic is volatile by nature. Even brief exposure can cause severe injury or death. For this reason, strict safety systems are required to store it safely. The chemical must be kept cool, isolated from contaminants, and constantly monitored. Any failure in these conditions can cause a violent reaction. By 1984, many of these safety measures no longer functioned as intended. Demand for pesticides had declined, and the factory was no longer profitable. Cost-cutting became routine. The refrigeration system designed to keep the mic cool was shut down to save money. The gas scrubber, meant to neutralize leaks, was operating at reduced capacity. The flare tower, which could burn off escaping toxic gas, was out of service. Alarms were unreliable. Staffing levels were low, and experienced workers had been replaced with less trained personnel. Internal safety reports had warned about these issues years earlier. Minor leaks had already occurred, injuring workers and signaling that the system was unstable. Each incident was treated as an isolated problem rather than a symptom of a failing operation. Management believed that a major disaster was unlikely. That belief would prove fatal. Shortly after midnight, water entered one of the tanks storing methyl isocyanate. The exact cause has never been conclusively determined, but the result was immediate and catastrophic. Water reacts violently with mic, triggering a rapid increase in temperature and pressure inside the tank. As the chemical heated up, the pressure rose beyond safe limits. Gauges began showing abnormal readings. Workers noticed, but confusion and understaffing delayed a decisive response. As the pressure continued to build, the tank began releasing gas into the atmosphere. At approximately 12:40 a.m., a massive cloud of toxic methyl isocyanate escaped into the night. The gas was colorless, but it had a sharp, choking odor. Heavier than air, it hugged the ground and moved quickly toward the nearby residential areas. A warning siren at the plant was briefly activated, then shut off. Officials later claimed it was turned off to prevent panic. No citywide alert followed. The people of Bhopal were left unprotected, unaware that a lethal cloud was spreading through their streets while they slept. Those closest to the plant were the first to wake up. Their eyes burned intensely. Breathing became painful within seconds. Many thought it was smoke or tear gas. As the gas filled their lungs, panic set in. People ran from their homes, coughing violently, vomiting and struggling to see. Children cried. Parents searched for family members in the darkness. Visibility dropped as the gas mixed with the night air. The gas spread rapidly, reaching entire neighborhoods within minutes. Streets filled with people trying to escape, but no one knew where to go. The cloud moved faster than those running from it. Some collapsed almost immediately. Others made it only a few steps before falling unconscious. The silence of the night was replaced by coughing, screaming, and confusion. Hospitals were unprepared for what followed. Victims arrived in overwhelming numbers, many blind or barely able to breathe. Doctors had no information about the chemical involved. Union Carbide did not immediately disclose the exact nature of the gas, citing proprietary concerns. Without knowing what they were dealing with, medical staff could not administer proper treatment. Oxygen supplies ran out. Hospital floors filled with patients. Many died waiting for help that never came. By morning, the scale of the disaster became impossible to ignore. Bodies lay in the streets, in homes, and outside hospitals. Entire families were found dead in their beds. Animals and birds littered the ground, evidence of how lethal the gas had been. Official death counts initially reported a few thousand fatalities. Independent estimates later suggested that more than 3,000 people died within the first days, and that long-term deaths linked to the exposure would eventually reach 15,000 or more. Over 500,000 people were exposed to the gas. For survivors, the suffering did not end when the gas dissipated. Many were left with permanent injuries. Chronic respiratory disease, damaged eyesight, neurological disorders. Pregnant women suffered miscarriages. Children born years later showed signs of birth defects. Families lost their primary sources of income. Entire communities were pushed into long-term poverty as a result of the disaster. In the weeks and months that followed, questions of responsibility dominated public discussion. Union Carbide maintained that the disaster was caused by sabotage, not negligence. Investigations, however, revealed a pattern of ignored warnings, disabled safety systems, and systemic cost-cutting. The plant in Bhopal had been allowed to operate under conditions that would not have been acceptable in wealthier countries. Legal proceedings dragged on for years. A settlement was eventually reached between Union Carbide and the Indian government, but many survivors felt it was insufficient. Compensation was slow, inconsistent, and often failed to account for long-term health effects. Senior executives faced little to no legal consequence. For many victims, justice never truly arrived. The physical site of the disaster became another symbol of neglect. The factory was abandoned, but never properly cleaned up. Toxic waste remained in the soil and groundwater, continuing to affect nearby communities decades later. Even today, residents report contaminated water and ongoing health problems linked to exposure long after 1984. What makes Bhopal particularly disturbing is not only the scale of the disaster, but how easily it was forgotten. Unlike other major catastrophes, it did not become a permanent fixture in global memory. It was rarely taught, rarely commemorated, and often reduced to a footnote in discussions of industrial safety. For those who lived through it, that silence became part of the tragedy. Bhopal was not a natural disaster. It was not unpredictable. It was the result of human decisions made over years, choices that prioritized profit and efficiency over safety and accountability. Every disabled alarm, every ignored report, and every budget cut contributed to what happened that night. On December 2, 1984, a city went to sleep as it had countless times before. By morning, it had become a symbol of what happens when warnings are dismissed and responsibility is delayed. The gas cloud may have vanished, but the consequences never truly did. And the question Bhopal leaves behind is a simple one. When disaster is foreseeable, at what point does it stop being an accident and become a choice?